you guys and I want to go the other way.
Yeah, we feel that from almost everybody.
We noticed that last weekend, yeah. Everyone's like, oh, let's just talk to each other rather than them.
In other places we've been, like when we have lunches, like everybody's there around us asking questions all the time. We had to say, look, we need to eat, you know. Here it's like...
It was like, oh no.
Nobody's...
break, let's just...
Get away from them for a 3/4 hour. Yeah.
I kind of have to warm up to you.
Yeah.
That's one way to trigger Mary. That.
It's all right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's funny because, like, I feel like we show up warmed up to you guys. You know.
Yeah.
But no. I do understand. We're not to everyone's taste.
Well, it's the reverse. I have to remember that you're not going to bite. You don't bite.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of times when we're truthful or when we're not in facade with you, it brings up, like what Samir was saying. It sort of feels like we're biting sometimes, doesn't it? If you're fighting what you feel, and then you're like, whoa, that doesn't feel good to me. But as you change, you'll learn to feel like it's really good. Like, thank goodness.
That truth, you mean?
Yeah. Truth and no pretense with you, no facade, and not accepting of your pretenses. Yeah. And
you'll know when you've made significant improvement in your life by coming to a point of loving personal truth.
Yeah.
If you're at a point where you're always trying to keep it away from yourself all the time, you still haven't made a lot of significant progress.
Yeah.
When you make proper progress in God's way, you come to really love the truth and appreciate the truth, you know. Yeah. And you're not just seeking the universal truth, you're also seeking on a day-to-day basis, not from other people, but from a day-to-day basis, you're seeking to understand more of what's going on inside of yourself that's unloving. Dealing with your sin, you know, for example. So it's been interesting on this trip because we actually had some sessions where we talked about sin a bit, and everyone gets pretty like distressed when we start talking about sin. It's like, you know, we talk about other things that are to do with universal matters, and everybody's pretty enthusiastic, and as soon as you talk about sin, it's like whole audiences go quiet on you. You know, like nobody wants to deal with their sin. Yeah. And we see this in society as well a lot. Yeah.
Everyone wants to feel that they've been harmed rather than that they might be doing harm.
Yeah. It obviously makes sense. If all of you have been harmed, then somebody must have done it. If you think about that. If all of you have been harmed one way or the other, then somebody must have done it. But that means that you probably have done it to other people too, right? But the average person goes like, I didn't do any of it. Like, it was all somebody else harmed me. But of course that physically isn't possible that you didn't do any of it, bearing in mind the fact that almost all of us feel harmed one way or the other. Yeah. So we're very, self-absorbed when it comes to dealing with things.
Yeah.
When you get to the point where you want to see that you're actually harming people versus like...
Well, it's all to do with your love of truth and seeing the personal, having faith in it. The average person on earth does not have faith that truth is going to bring them benefit.
Yeah.
So they instead believe that truth is going to harm them one way or the other. They feel that truth will affect their life negatively one way or the other. You see this all the time in relationships where people are not willing to sort out their relationship difficulties because they're worried the relationship will actually completely disintegrate if they talk about it. Right? So what they do is they just don't talk about it. So anything that distresses them in the relationship, they just don't discuss, don't talk about, don't resolve. And so in that place, even with your partner frequently we can see people living in this sort of facade with their own partners even. So if you're living in facade with the person you're living with, it's pretty likely you're living in facade with everybody else as well, isn't it? Yeah. And facade is a lie, and a lie is opposite to truth. So, you know, most people most people who hear divine truth don't even apply it to that depth, where they even apply the truth, that I'm going to be truthful even with my partner at every moment. Most people don't apply it to that depth, and as a result, you don't ever get to have any faith in truth. You don't get to have faith of, this is actually good. This works really well,
Yeah.
You don't get to have that faith, and the lack of faith in truth means that you have a lack of faith in what's going to bring you freedom, because truth is what sets you free. So without faith in it, you're going to stay enslaved. So enslaved to your addictions, enslaved to relationships, enslaved to your life. Without truth, it's a very, very important thing, truth. Yeah. And maybe that's a good place to start our discussion. What's the time?
Still 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
We are.
Yeah. So we'll wait a little bit longer for any latecomers. But
yeah, we can't really do any housekeeping either, can we?
Yeah.
I can, hang on, I'll just turn this on. Excuse me.
Is this your last event?
Yes.
It's our last overseas event, yeah.
Overseas, yeah.
You're on the penultimate one.
The ultimate one.
The ultimate one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been busy. We've had altogether, I think, 40. It's worked out to be now, because we've added additional days here and there.
40 days, yeah.
Where we've been,
probably more. Yeah.
Yeah, probably 40. I think it worked out. I think 42 it was. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been like pretty busy every week. Yeah. So we've been doing pretty much 3 days a week since we started.
Since we started. We had this discussion during the week, because I said to Jesus, I feel all right. And
I'm getting used to the stress.
Yeah, and he said, is it just that we're used to being extremely tired all of the time? Or is it I think we're sleeping more than the first month of the trip, we really didn't get any good
Is there any
quality
empty
sleep.
chairs down the front of here?
Yeah.
So there's one here.
There's a couple here. Oh, we don't need them there.
Yeah, let's take those off. There's 2 here at the front here. And there's one in between there, is there? Yeah. You guys can move over a bit. Yeah, we'll sit together.
All right, how's our guest list, Kim and Cheng? How many not are here? Oh, quite a few. 12.
Yeah. No worries.
Wow. I think we could start.
Well, I think you can at least do the mic thing.
Do we have any volunteers to be microphone runners today? Yeah, Boris and Jennifer. Okay, I'll just give you some instructions.
Now you have to sit on the ends, so if you can swap with your person
places.
that you're near or whatever. Yep.
And I recommend that you both just choose a side.
One side or the other.
Yeah, and deal with questions. So Jennifer, if you're on this side, you deal with people asking questions on this side.
Yeah.
This is their seat, so should I talk to them?
Just move them across, that's fine.
Yeah. You have to be on the end if you're going to be mic.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe, can I just give you the instructions, Jen, and then you can do that later. So, and this is instructions for everyone. So when you ask a question, please raise your hand, and Jennifer and Boris, don't hand the microphone to a person until we've designated, yes, we're going to that person next. When you're holding, as mic runners, please don't bump the microphones, and same goes when you've got the mic in your hand. When you're asking the question, just be careful not to bash it around. Don't adjust anything on the bottom at any stage. When you are asking your question or having conversation with us, please put the microphone on your chin and your chest. That just means that the sound will come through. Sometimes people start to gesture and then we can't hear what's being said. So if you just remember chin and chest, that's a good way to remember, and it makes sure that we'll definitely hear you. Okay? If you notice people are not putting the microphone chin and chest, you can just prompt them, put it back. Yeah, because you'll be closer to them.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. as we were just saying, this is our last event on this trip. We've been in how many locations? 8 or 9, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and San Diego is our last. So I don't know if I'm really looking forward to going home. I think I've enjoyed this quite a lot, and I hope we have a good 3 days together coming up. Yeah, just a little bit of housekeeping. We're starting at 11, ending at 4 each day, so for the 3 days. If you need to use the bathroom, there's bathrooms up both ends of this complex. So it depends a little bit on how many other rooms are being used as to which set are busier. But they're signposted.
Not a lot today, I don't think.
Yeah, it seems very quiet here today, so you could go either direction. Please be back promptly at the end of the lunch break. We'll have a half-hour lunch break and we'll let you know when that is, just so that we can keep things rolling. We want to thank some people who've helped us in our San Diego leg of this trip. So Kim and Cheng, thank you very much. They would have done your name tag. Those guys have been very generous with us in terms of resources and time, so we're really thankful. We've had the benefit of their vehicle and water bottles and lots of other things that have really helped us to be comfortable in San Diego, so thanks guys. We also want to thank Heather, who's done a lot to help get the San Diegan events happening. The chairs that we're sitting on are courtesy of Heather, and we've had a blender, and Heather and Kim actually helped a lot with venue searching. I was doing it remotely in Australia with them, so thanks Heather. And Sai and Anusha, who have also been hospitable to us during this trip. The whiteboard, courtesy of those guys, and various other little things, so thank you very much.
And Michael with the sound.
Yes. Michael, yeah. It's not a small thing, Mike. Yeah, Michael has generously purchased the speaker setup so that we can use that every time we come to the West Coast. So that's been a big help.
Yeah.
And
so it's about $4,500 US. That was.
Yeah, that he donated to us for future trips. Actually, hiring speakers in the US is quite costly, and we figured out it makes more sense to just make a purchase up front. If anyone wants to donate towards the cost of that, you can do that with Mike. But yeah, it's been very helpful to us. We'll probably donate to Mike as well as time goes on to help him defray the costs.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
Thanks.
What was that?
Could you clap for the microphone?
Oh yes, we'll do that.
Yes.
We need to grab the microphones.
Yeah.
We need
Can
to
we
just
have them back?
synchronise.
Sorry. Yeah.
So we do that.
Yeah, we just do this funny ritual, which is actually syncing the sound and the video. Yep. Okay, here we go. Lovely. All right, is there any other housekeeping we need to cover?
No, unless you want to vacuum the floor too.
No. Can I just ask that you put your mobile phones to silent?
Please.
Yeah, please. Just a reminder. And just be conscious of how interruptive any sounds you make in the room are towards other listeners. Also, you can record, if you want to audio record the session, you're very welcome to. Yeah. But just make sure that phone is on silent. All right, guys, let's have fun, hey? Or have truth anyway.
Which is
we
fun.
think that's fun, but you might not.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about just before, weren't we?
Yeah.
Do you remember where you were headed?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. I think when we look at, obviously Mary and I are travelling a lot, speaking to people all the time. So, on this trip, I think we've spoken to 600 or 700 people at least, maybe more than that. And every time we go on a trip of any kind, we're usually speaking to lots of different people. And in talking to people, we normally see a general pattern that arises. And the general pattern is fundamentally a misunderstanding about the importance of the truth to yourself. A lot of people believe that the truth is what other people should hear, rather than what you need to hear, right? And I'd just like to, as an introduction to this weekend, talk a bit about truth in terms of beliefs. So our subject matter will be beliefs matters again, like we did the last 2 weeks. We've talked about these things. But before I do this week, I'd like to just talk about a fundamental principle that's worth bearing in mind for your future. God knows everything. Now, that means he knows you, he knows how you were created, he knows your purpose, he knows your desires, he knows your passions. He understands where you are right now, he understands all of your feelings and emotions, but he also understands things like how you are built, how you're made, how your soul has been designed, how your physical body has been designed, how your spirit body was designed. And he didn't make a mistake. He didn't make a mistake on any of these things. So the average person sort of believes when they look at the world today and they look at all the problems that we face in the world and when they look at their personal problems, like their own health and other things like that, they think, well, why did God create it that I got this? And if you bear in mind that God did not make a mistake, can you see there must be something else going wrong other than God making a mistake? Now, of course, if it's your own health or your own welfare, then probably the person who's made a mistake is me, right? But that's not how the average person feels. The average person feels that everyone else made the mistake, and that's why I've got what I've got. But let's look at God. God knows all truth. So all truth, you could say truth. You could also say it as God's laws. But you could also say that it's what God likes or loves. So God created laws because he loves them. And he created you because he loves you. But he created laws because he loves laws. Right? And he created the laws that govern you because he loves you. So they're not like human laws. Human laws are often created just to annoy the hell out of you, aren't they? That's what it seems like sometimes anyway. But God created laws because he loves you and they're going to help you one way or the other. So there's a group of laws, physical, we've talked about the hierarchy of laws, and many of you would have heard this already, where there's a hierarchy where really you've got your spiritual laws, which are the most important laws. Then you've got the laws that govern sort of your emotions, right, which are less in priority to the spiritual laws. And of course in spiritual laws there's also a hierarchy of law. There's a hierarchy, some laws are higher than others. In other words, they overcome the effects of others. Same applies with the emotions. And same applies with your sexual behaviour. There's actually laws that govern your sexual behaviour. And so when you experience things that sexually cause pain, it's because you've broken some of those laws. And then there's also laws that govern your physical behaviour. You could say, your physical body, but also your behaviour physically. And they're a hierarchy of laws. But all of those laws are God's truth about how God feels. They're about what God loves, what he feels are good, right? And it's very important to understand this, that when you break law, you're also breaking, or you're also having an argument with God. And the argument you're having with God is, I don't like your laws. And yet God loves the laws. So how can you have a relationship with God if you don't like his laws and he loves them? It's going to be very difficult to have a decent relationship with God, while on one hand I'm not liking the laws personally, but on the other hand, God does love them. So for the most part, the average person starts to listen to divine truth, and for the most part, they start listening to all of the truths, this group of truths, that are to do with how the universe works. And they hear the truth about this and about the human soul. They hear the truth about the spheres, the spirit world, the life after death. They hear the truths about God existing, God's personality, God's nature, human soul, personality and nature, the dual nature of the human soul, soulmates, and all these other truths that people hear, many of which we've very only really at this stage discussed quite rudimentary. We've only been quite basic in terms of the information provided. But the average person is quite fascinated with all of these things, and particularly fascinated because it all seems to be logically it all sort of meets the requirements of being logical as well as quite fascinating. And so the average person becomes very interested in that. And during this phase of your interest, you watch everything, and you know, how many of you have watched hours and hours and hours of our videos, like from one end to the other of it? Yeah, see what I'm saying, right? Because you get one video goes, you go, wow, what's another one? I'll watch that one, and because the truth is fascinating. It is fascinating and very, very logical, and it's very important to see how great it is. And during the phase where you're interested in the universal truth, you're thinking, this is fantastic. And you're enthusiastic, aren't you, during that phase? You could call that your honeymoon period with God's truth, your honeymoon period. Normal honeymoon periods, like that's the time they have sex 5 times a day or 10 times a day, and you're spending all the time with each other, isn't it wonderful? And there's
Gazing at each other,
thinking it's wonderful, and everybody and
everyone's like, oh.
Everyone's going, oh, what's going on with them? That's all happening in this phase, really, where you're watching things and you're thinking about these matters and things like that. But the interesting thing is that during that phase, the average person doesn't understand and really has no soul grasp about how it's going to impact the rest of their life. And what they do is they have a tendency to sort of view it like a religion. And on earth, religion is generally viewed as something that you do on Sunday.
Over here, yeah.
Or one day of the week. If you're a 7-day Adventist, it might be Saturday. If you're Jewish, it might start Friday night. So it just depends. But it's a thing you do, but it's not a thing that affects all of your life. It's just a thing that affects part of your life, right? And the average person also has no desire to know what God feels about them in relation to the truth that God knows. So in other words, they're prepared to look at the universal truth and even prepared to try to examine some truths about God. But when it comes to themselves, still very unprepared to examine any truth. Now, can you see that if I learn universal truth, and even if I could learn it all in my mind, which by the way I can't, there are certain parts of the universe that are completely inaccessible to you if you use your mind. But let's say you could, in your mind, learn all the universal truths that God had available. Can you see that's of no benefit to you until you apply them? Can you see that? In other words, it's not going to change your life until you do something about where you are in relation to those truths. In other words, your relationship with the universal truth, so remember this is a truth here about how the universe works and everything else, your relationship with that is going to require you to examine the truth about yourself. It's going to require that of you at some point. Now, this is where the average person really fails when it comes to their seeking nature with regard to truth. See, while you're interested in that, you're sort of like a little child who's going, Daddy, why does the moon up there for? It seems to be up in nowhere. Why is the sky blue? Why is the rainbow all those colours? The child is looking at the things around it going, why, and it doesn't have a feeling of like resistance to the presentation of truth. Even if Daddy says, you know, the rainbow is because some Martians put it there or whatever, some untruthful explanation, the child will just listen to it, and then if it doesn't really make a lot of sense, he'll ask more questions. He's not a person who criticises what's coming at himself. He's just open to absorbing as much as possible, and the logical brain and also the emotions in the child are going, but that doesn't really sound right, so I need to ask more questions. And he just keeps asking why. The child does that. But the child at this stage doesn't understand how those truths are linking to its own life. So in a lot of ways, most of us with divine truth are like a child. We're asking, why is this? Why is that? Why is this? How did that happen? Why did that happen? And all those kind of questions, which are all fascinating to know and understand. In other words, we're asking all the truths about universal truth, and even about the human body and how it's made, and the spirit body, how it's made, and the soul, how it's made, and all these other things. But we're still like children in a lot of ways, because we still don't really know how it applies to me. It doesn't seem to affect my life yet. And the child who understands that the truth has a personal impact will start looking and examining at how they can bring their life in harmony to the truth being learnt. The child who wants to have some personal benefit from the truth will actually want to bring their personal life into harmony with the truth being learnt. So instead of asking, why, what happens when you die? That's a good question. Once the child receives the answer to what happens when you die, the real question is what's going to happen to them when they die? Because if they don't bring themselves into harmony with some truths, what happens to you when you die is going to be a very, very different experience to when you were in harmony with those truths. On a physical layer, let's say there's a truth, the truth of the gravity. If the child sort of almost naturally learns that truth, don't they? Like they fall over a few times and they realise falling over hurts, and it's because, normally if you were just in space, you could sort of propel yourself, and until you hit something else, you won't hurt yourself. But on Earth, if you propel yourself in any direction because of gravity, more than likely you're going to come down after you've gone up. And depending on how far you've gone up, it's going to depend on how much it hurts when you come down. So if it's just a little bit, not so bad. But if it's from a cliff or a building, then it's going to be pretty bad. The child learns that. So it learns not only the law, gravity, but it learns that when it breaks that law, it hurts. There's pain when it breaks the law of gravity. When it attempts to go beyond the, you could say, the design functionality of the capacity of the human body, by breaking that law, it's going to hurt. The child learns that. And the child learns as long as it lives in harmony with the law, it'll be fine. It's safe. It can't fly out into space, and it can't be damaged in any way as long as it lives in harmony with that law. But as soon as it doesn't, it hurts, it's pain. Right? But unfortunately, the average person who hears divine truth and hears about the laws pertaining to these matters, they go, I still believe that if I break those laws, there will be no pain for me. So they're not like the child learning about gravity and then living within the confine of the law. They're like these people who are going, I'm just going to try to ignore the law and see where that gets me. But because if you ignore any law, there will be pain and suffering, then naturally, how I live in harmony with the law is going to be a very, very big statement and also result with regard to my happiness. Like, If I live in disharmony with the law, I will become unhappy. If I live in harmony with the law, I will become happy. Right? And the average child knows that about physical laws, but unfortunately, the average child and the average adult does not know it about any of these laws. The laws pertaining to your sexual behaviour, your emotions and your spiritual behaviour, the average person knows nothing about how the law works, and also whether that particular law, living in disharmony with it, that it's going to cause the majority of their pain. Right? So in other words, the average person looks at the truth from the universe and goes, isn't it fascinating? And they've got a honeymoon period with the truth about the universe. But when it comes to the truth about how they themselves are operating in harmony with that universe, the average person doesn't want to know anything about it. That's where we have most of our trouble. We don't want to know anything about how it affects ourselves. We only want to know how fascinating it is, and we usually enter these places of a lot of intellectual, oh, isn't it great this, and talking about it with everybody is wonderful. But as soon as it comes to drawing it all back to self and going, well, how about me? Am I living in harmony with this truth? And what's going to happen when I don't? The average person becomes very, very resistive to making any changes in their life to bring their life into harmony with that truth. So that's the problem. That's a big problem. It's one of the major problems that we face on earth. It's a major problem for the whole earth, not just for you, not just for this audience. Because if you look at the whole earth, we're basically ignoring the personal application of laws pertaining to sexuality, emotions and spirituality. The whole earth's doing that. This is why we've got so much trauma on earth, because all of us are doing that, and we're doing it collectively as well as individually. And even the people who've heard God's truth, heard divine truth, even though they've been so enthusiastic in this phase of, the honeymoon period of discovering the truth, even though that is the case, when it comes to this phase where they start to look at, is this truth going to be of personal benefit to me? It can only be of personal benefit to me when I apply it. When you start looking at that, the average person reacts in a rejecting manner. They want to reject it. They get upset. They get angry. They get all sorts of resistance in that place because they don't want to apply the truth to themselves. They're happy to apply it to everybody else, but not to themselves. Right? And of course, applying it to another person. So let's say I think Mary should learn that truth. Have I got control over what Mary chooses to do with her life? Not really, right? She has her own will. She can do whatever she wishes. She can leave me if she wants.
If you want control over what I do with my will,
then probably you will leave me. Isn't that true? So can you see that my desire to get control over Mary by suggesting to her that she needs to make changes, if that's my motive, and not look at myself, is futile for me? Because what I'm doing is I'm basically saying, you need to change, but you don't have control over how she changes. The only person you have control over how you change is yourself, me. The only person I have control over is me. I don't have any control over any of you. I don't have any control over my partner. I don't even have any control over my children. Most of you as parents who have become parents know that, right? Eventually they grow up and they leave home, and how much control do you have? Mostly zero, right? And if you're a good parent, you think that's a good thing, right? Because it means that they are self-determining their life, which is great. So if I have a desire to say truth to other people in order to change them, that already is out of harmony with love to a large degree. The only good motive for sharing truth with a person is to help them be happier if that's what they want. Right? That's the only good motive. There's no other motive. No other motive that's good for sharing truth. Now, to understand that, I would first have to know, I need to be the one who looks at myself first. I'm the one who can change me. It makes sense that if I want to be happier in my life, I'm the person who's going to have to face some truth. And I'm the person who's going to have to love the laws that God created. Or you could say, love the laws that God loves. Because God only creates things he loves. So love the laws that God loves. I need to come to love the laws as much as God loves them. That's how I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be then living in harmony with those laws. I'm going to want to know what they are, but not just for the sake of an intellectual exercise, but for the sake of my personal happiness. I'll want to know what they are. Can you see the difference? One is just like a fascination, just like the child would be going, how does that work and what does that look like? You know, that's a fascination. But at that stage, the child doesn't know. Understanding these truths means that you can become happy, right? And the child doesn't understand the relationship, and for the most part never taught it because their own parents don't understand the relationship either generally, that if you obey the law and you come to understand more and more laws, you become happy. That's the benefit of obeying the law personally. Unless I apply the truth that I'm learning to me, it is not going to be of any benefit to my life. It's not going to affect my happiness. So I can apply it and look at it and even examine it and study it and be fascinated by it and all those other wonderful things, which isn't it fantastic? Yes, it is. But at the end of the day, if I don't apply that truth to me, it's all going to be of no benefit to me. It's just going to be a bunch of knowledge or information, but it hasn't benefited me. Make sense? There's a chair down the front. Sorry, it's right down the front. Is there other chair? There's another chair there. If you want to.
Yeah, there's chairs.
Yeah, if you want to go there. It's pretty hard down the front. Okay, so can you see God's truth is God's laws, and God loves those laws. You could even say that the truth or the laws are an expression of God's personality. The laws tell us things about how God feels about things. So they're an expression of God's personality, these laws that God created. And so if I want to get to know God, I would like to firstly look at those laws and study them, but more importantly, if I really want to have a relationship with God, I will need to have the same laws in my heart. I will need to feel the law, not just observe it, agree with it, or try to apply it intellectually through my behaviour, but actually I need to get to a stage, if I want to have a relationship with God, where I actually feel the way God feels about that, and I feel the same way as God feels about the law.
And that's a process, isn't it? Like when
Yep.
we start to emotionally engage with the law, it's not always in our heart. Sometimes we've got resistance, but if we are emotionally engaging and experimenting with the law and learning the law as we do experiments to live in harmony with it, our faith builds, and eventually we go through an emotional process where the law is literally inside of us now.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are in harmony with God on that law.
Yep.
Yeah, and so then we don't even have to think about it anymore. We
No.
act in harmony with the law.
It's automatic.
Automatically.
Yeah. We don't have to try. We don't have to force our behaviour. It's automatic now because the law is written in our own heart, right? Because we've chosen to write it there, not for any other purpose or reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But most of the time when we're in that first stage that you're talking about where the truth is external and universal, we might intellectually consider a law, but there's no emotional engagement with it yet. It's only when we start to emotionally engage with the law, which is partly when we want the truth about ourselves, and then we want to measure that truth about ourselves emotionally with how God feels about that, about the truth, where we're at spiritually, emotionally, physically and sexually, that then we can start to feel our distance from the law, if you like, and if we correct that, then we begin to come into harmony with the law, and eventually we go through a process where the law is in us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you could say there's all these external truths are not going to benefit me while they remain external. They're only going to benefit me if I internalise them, if they become a part of me internally. That's the only way they're going to benefit me in my life. And of course, as soon as it benefits me, anybody I associate with, by nature, will also, by default, is also going to be benefited too. The more I'm in harmony with the law, then of course Mary, if she's living with me, is going to benefit from me being in harmony with the law. And the more I'm in harmony with the law, the environment I live in is going to benefit from me being in harmony with the law. Right? In other words, you could say it another way, the more loving I become, the more Mary's going to benefit from my love. The more loving I become, the more the environment will benefit from my love. Right? I become more loving when I'm in harmony with the law. Because remember, all of God's laws are what God loves, and they're also God's truth, and they're also all about love, in the sense that they are all motivated by God's desire to love us. Right? So, looking at the truth from an external thing, while it's fascinating, and I'm not saying to stop doing it, because the more external truth you understand, the better it's going to be for you. But unless it becomes internal, unless it becomes something that's now inside of you emotionally, it's not going to actually benefit you personally. Even if you know it intellectually, if you're not acting in harmony with it emotionally, there is not going to be a benefit to that truth. See, what we notice is a lot of people have listened to Divine Truth for many years, and they think they know a lot. And in fact, they write me whole dissertations. Good word. Dissertations on what they know. And yet, I can feel that almost everybody who does that doesn't feel a single thing of what they're saying. And they have not personally applied it in their personal life ever. So they might think they know it, but at the end of the day, it's not benefiting them. It's not benefiting anybody they associate with. It's not benefiting their environment. So this disconnect that the average person has between the examination of external truth and then the process of internalising it is a big problem that we face. So on this trip, Mary and I have been trying to help people come to see the principles, God's principles, which govern all of God's laws, and how if you really focus on the principle, you don't really have to do much else, because all of the emotions will start popping up and all the things that you're in disharmony with will all start coming up if you focus on these principles. But the average person does not understand even the principles themselves. So an example of that is, what does love really look like? Well, the average person on earth has no idea. We can see they have no idea, because if you look at the whole earth, it's in a mess, isn't it? And if we had some idea of what love looked like, the earth wouldn't be in a mess. Right? So that's evidence that we don't have any idea. But the average person goes, well, I know what love looks like, it's just everybody else doesn't know. But again, it's because we're going, everybody else has got the problem, but not me. Right? But I must have a problem if I've been brought up in this world and I'm comfortable living in it how it is, relatively, then I've got to have some issues with my definition of love that's false. So when we talk about principles such as truth or love, The average person has no idea what those principles actually are, right? They're just words that people use all the time because they sound good, and the definition of them in the dictionary is good. And so they sound good and we use them all the time. But actually, we have no idea what they are. An example of that is many parents are using their children for their own benefit. And what I mean by that is many parents spend a lot of time saying, I want to tell my children what to do in their life, right? And they all say, it's because I love them so much. That's what they say, is the reason why they do that. But actually that's completely the opposite of the way God loves. So therefore it's not loving at all. God isn't in your ear all the time telling you what you should do with your life. So why are you in your child's ear all the time telling them what to do with theirs? You understand? So here, that's an example of how love, the human definition, is one way, and yet God doesn't do it. So therefore, it's not God's definition of what love is. But the average human thinks, what, you're not allowed to say anything to your children about, what they should be doing in their life? I say, that's correct, you're not allowed to.
There's a penalty.
There's a penalty. There's a law-based penalty. God designed laws to correct that behaviour. There's a law-based penalty every time you try to tell somebody else what to do with their life. There's a law-based penalty. That's different than just sharing, this is the law, do what you will with it, right? Which is what Mary and I do. Here's the law, whatever you do with it, it's up to you.
And also, it's different as a parent not supporting your child to break the law. That's something, a lot of kids say, I want to break the law, mummy. And they're like, okay, here's the resources to do that. In actual, from God's definition, that's what happens a lot.
Yeah.
So parenting is, if we parent the way God does, we say, here's the law and there's consequences if you break it.
Yep.
Yeah.
But the average person goes, that's not very loving. Like, not loving to the parent. I brought them into the world. Now, that's not even the truth. You didn't bring them into the world. Like, God designed their soul, created their soul. He did all that hard work, right? You didn't do any of that. Then the whole incarnation process, which began by the creation of the two bodies, well, all you did was have sex. But all the processes that define what happens when you have sex all happened, and you didn't create any of those processes either. Right? So how much of it did you do? You did it depends how long the sex lasts, doesn't it? But
And
you really did the conception, which is really the ejaculation and the response of the egg to one of the sperm cells hitting that egg, and that's all you did.
if you're the guy. If you're the woman, you did a bit after that.
If you're the woman, you did a lot more.
Yeah.
So it makes me laugh when people say, oh, we're pregnant. And I go, who's pregnant? Because the guy isn't. The girl is, right? So the girl may then carry the child for 9 months, so she's now doing something. You could say from that time on they're now doing something, because now they've engaged a process of attempting to care for this child.
But they didn't create
something. But they didn't create the child.
No.
Didn't create its bodies, didn't create its soul. The child's not theirs. Right? So whenever you say, my child, you're already in an error, because it's not your child. It's God's child in the bodies that you happened to create by accident. That's the truth. So when we say, oh, but my child, so I should be able to, and follow that with ... anything you like, no, you shouldn't be able to. It's not. The only thing that should be done is you educate this younger brother or sister of yours that you've decided to create some bodies for, and you didn't even decide how to do it, you just did it. And the loving thing to do would be help them in their life some way or other, particularly help them with the laws would be great. That would be the best thing, because then they'd understand the universe and the life they live in, and they'd apply that truth to themselves, and then they'd do well in life. But the average parent doesn't do that. The average parent does very much different to that, and sins greatly in the bringing up of their own children. And in the process of doing that, there's lots of penalties, spiritually, emotionally, sexually and physically, on the parent, right, for their actions taken that were out of harmony with the laws that God loves. And most of us go, and when we start learning those laws, we go, surely it's not like that. It can't be like that, surely. Like, we're happy to learn the universal truth of how things have been created, but when it comes to the laws that pertain to our behaviour, sexually, emotionally and spiritually, and even our own physical behaviour many times, we are completely unwilling to examine, right? And that is the fundamental difficulty Mary and I have when we're teaching. The average audience doesn't want to know the laws pertaining to the governance of your life. Right? Because most people on earth fundamentally have one false belief that guides most of their life. And that false belief is a false belief about who God is. Most people on earth believe they themselves are God. So the fundamental problem that we face is that we actually believe there isn't a God, an entity who has the right to create law, has the desire to create loving laws and did create loving laws. The fundamental problem the average human has, and even the average human who hears divine truth has, is that we do not respect the fact that God is the authority. What we do instead is we think that we are the authority. Right? And in the process of believing that, we start to refuse God's laws, refuse God's truth, and of course, because how God shares her love is also governed by law, we're really also refusing God's love in the process. And that's what happens. And then, of course, because when the laws are broken, there are penalties of sadness, you could say, unhappiness, pain and suffering results when you break the law. Many of us then live quite difficult lives. And many people on earth don't realise that even in the Western world, the majority of people, well, I'd say everyone I've met, is living a much more difficult life than they need to because of how much they're breaking the law. Right? And then we start even going even further than that, and we start reasoning with ourselves going, this is normal. Like, as if God created it to be the way the world currently is. We even go to that extent. We go so far down this track of breaking the law that we go, it's normal. This is normal life. This is what normal people are like. Now, I know a lot of people, and a lot of them are friends that I have in the spirit world, and they're not like you. So what you believe is normal isn't normal there. So a lot of times it's just what we perceive as normal in the environment we're living in. That's what we think is normal. Make sense? So this problem, this underlying problem of our acceptance and internalisation of truth, this underlying problem is a major problem. And almost every person that we've met on this trip has this problem. Right? This fundamental problem where you're fascinated with the external truth, but when it comes to applying it personally, you don't want to know. Don't want to apply it personally. Or there are some who want to apply it personally, but only if it's of personal benefit to themselves and no one else, which is fundamentally selfish and breaking the law. Right? So still not understanding how God's truth is applied. Now, is there any questions about that before I move on? Yeah? So over here next to John.
I think it's really cool that what you're saying is that all of those laws about the truth about me, is it that what's going to get you to like basically kind of like being in like the Garden of Eden and like living how that is back then, and like if I don't like the truth about me, then
just because
if I don't know the truth about me, then my happiness is going to get me like back to like that Garden of Eden like type lifestyle. But the thing is, what I love is that I feel like we don't have any, like, we can't see, like, because nobody has any faith that like we can live that type of life, because in the world, like, we see nobody living that type of life. So like just being like in here in San Diego, like you can just feel people like this is all what they think life can be, like at all.
That's
and, like,
right.
But I just think it's really interesting that you're saying like the laws and stuff, like even though we find them like really hard right now, that's the thing that's going to get you to like happiness and to like the Garden of Eden type lifestyle,
Yeah.
which is what God intended, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. So the key problem becomes the quality, doesn't it,
Faith,
that we need to develop ourselves.
And isn't it more of like experimenting? Like, because like if we don't see anybody like experimenting, like with having faith of like, okay, this law, even though it hurts right now, or like even getting the truth about me hurts right now, because we don't see anybody experimenting with it and having faith, like we can't really, like we don't know what's possible at all.
Correct.
Like I love that talk that you were doing when you're talking
Just
about.
put the mic on you.
On your chin.
Oh.
On your chin.
I love that talk where you're talking about like what we think reality. You said it, but like what we think reality is like nothing what God intended at all.
Correct.
Like,
Correct. Yeah.
I think that's right.
So the problem is we don't have any faith in God's reality.
Yeah, and also, is it like imagine like a parent obviously is at one with God, and you kind of like mentioned this, but like how easy it would be for the child to know. Like, because the parent is already acting like, or like doing everything loving. So like the child would have no trouble learning what is loving at all. So I kind of take that to say back, like, if we see people experimenting with the truth about themselves and love and stuff. Then,
Yeah, but crucially, you're mentioning seeing other people experimenting with it.
So
but
we're trying to talk about you.
I'm just saying.
Because the point is the real faith comes when you experiment with it.
Your
yes,
faith. Your
it
faith.
helps when we see other people develop and grow and we think, wow, they seem a lot happier than me. But the real faith only comes when you engage with the law.
That's kind of what I was talking about. Like, that's why it's great that like everybody's here and stuff, because like if we do what you're saying and stuff, then I'm saying like then they get to see us and stuff, and then finally some faith can be established. Like you were talking about in the other talks before, like I thought this was really cool. Like you were saying, like when one person becomes at one with God, like I think that you're saying like within a couple months the world would change. And like that just like destroyed me. Like I thought that was so cool because like,
Okay.
Si? That wasn't a question.
No.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
The whole God knows everything, the first sentence of this talk. It still is, I think that fits in the universal truth. It still kind of is not sitting with me, especially because when Max asked the question last week about if God knows everything that's going to happen in the future, how far into the future? Because if God's going to...
If you look back at our last 3 weekends, you've attended each one of them, right?
I have what?
You've attended
yes,
each event last 3 weeks. And if you look at every question you've asked, every one of them really is an expression of your lack of faith.
Yes.
In other words, the question itself is presupposing that God doesn't love you. It's presupposing that you can't trust God one way or the other. And these are fundamental feelings that many people on earth have, that you can't actually trust God. And the one reason why people believe this is because we look at the results of what's going on the earth right now, and we have a tendency, the majority of us, to blame God for what's going on the earth right now. We're saying if there is a creator, then why is he allowing this? But we never say, why am I allowing it? We never say, why are we collectively allowing it? We're instead going, why does God allow it? And the reason why we do this is because we're not honest with ourselves about who created what. See, if you look on earth and you examine all the things God created, so we're talking about trees, the earth itself, before humans got here, all the plants and animals that support your life. All of these things are expressions of God's love for you. Food, the variety of food, the joy of the variety of food, all expressions of God's love for you. So God, that's what God created. And then what have we done to it all? Humans. Well, we genetically modify the food, and in the process of doing that, we make it more resilient, but we also take away its taste. Have you noticed that? Like, I remember peach when I was a child, and I don't think I've ever had one since when I was about 20. Like, that tasted the same as when I was a child. And my taste buds have actually improved in their sensitivity over the last 60 years through the work I've done on myself, and yet everything tastes worse than it did when I was a child. So that's because we're doing things to even natural things, we're doing things to them and changing them to suit money, oftentimes, like to suit some kind of what we believe is productivity. But at the end of the end result is there's less joy in it. We experience less joy. But the majority of us are not looking at what humans are doing and saying, that's what humans are doing. We're saying, why does God let them do it?
Or rather, more to the question, why does God even want to have a relationship with me? If all the help He's going to send me, He knows whether that's going to be helpful or whether I'm going to make use of that help.
So why does He want a relationship with you, Si?
Yeah.
He gave you this gift of free will, another principle, right? And what does that mean with regard to His relationship with you? That means you can stop God from having a relationship with you.
Yes, but God already knows that I'm going to stop Him from having a relationship.
But
you can choose not to, though.
Right.
Yeah, and
but you're still not getting the point.
No, and
I
why
think
does
I'm placing myself in
stop.
God's position, which is making it hard.
Stop for a moment. Sorry, stop.
Why would God's knowledge of what's going to happen prevent God's joy in what does happen? You know, if you decide you want a relationship with God, why wouldn't that please God?
It's the one thing God doesn't have control over is how many of His children love Him. He doesn't have any control over that. He gave away that control by giving you free will. He gave away control of your love of Him by giving you or gifting you free will. Right? So by giving you this gift, He took away from Himself the effect of you automatically loving Him. You don't automatically love Him. It has to be a choice. Now imagine God's joy when you make the choice to love.
He must have already felt it, though, because He knows that it's going to happen in the future.
See what you're doing with your head now?
You're conflating omnipotence, knowledge, with emotion.
Which is not the same thing.
It's not the same thing.
How can He feel something that hasn't happened and you haven't done it? He can't feel it until you do it. He might know when you're going to do it, but He can't feel, even though He knows that, He's not going to feel it because free will dictates that He's not going to feel something until you have the feeling.
It's like if, say, you and Anusha had a baby, and you have a baby, and you know one day that child's going to say "daddy," or how would they say it in your language?
Nana.
Nana.
Yeah.
One day this little girl or boy is going to say Nana to me, but it hasn't happened yet. When it happens, do you think you're going to be like, oh, I knew that was going to happen? You know? Oh, whatever. Yeah.
It's not like that, is it?
No.
Yeah.
No, the feelings are very different than the intellectual knowledge.
Yeah.
And this is something you don't understand yet because you're totally in your mind about most things. Yeah. And so you don't understand the difference between the feeling and the intellectual knowledge. Make sense? Yeah.
The second question is...
Is it about your lack of faith?
No, it's actually completely different.
Can I go to Michael first? Because he has a question more related to these things.
This is a question that's like self-evident, so I'm thinking of not asking it, but I am getting that if I ask God, what is my resistance and what can I do about it, God's going to tell me, and that's the way I want to go. because I believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that God's got it all control, and I can bring myself into line, and my life will be happier, and I don't have to worry about hurting other people if I operate from love, because love is my motivation, and I'm not being injured anymore.
Yeah.
So that's where I want to go.
Yeah, so what's your question?
Can you please tell me as soon as possible?
Tell you what?
Yeah. All the personal truth. Yeah.
Well, you see, even your desire for personal truth is driven by your feelings, not your thoughts. Yeah. So this is what I notice a lot of people do. A lot of people come to us and say, can you please tell me, the next thing I need to learn or whatever. But most of the time what I feel from them is they don't want to hear anything. The feeling is saying, I don't want to hear, and the thought is saying, I do want to. So from God's perspective, if you look at that from God's perspective, the real thing is the emotion, not the thought. Like in amongst all this, you notice I haven't put thoughts. Mind you, there are sins that can be committed through your thoughts, but I haven't put any of it there in the list, right? And yet, for the majority of people on earth, they believe their thoughts are the most important things, right? And because we've been brought up to believe your thoughts are the most important things, we're also discounting the fact that your feelings are actually the most important things. That's how you experience things. When you experience emotion, that's when things become truthful. So an example of that with regard to the desire for truth, Michael, is this desire here for the truth about myself needs to be an emotional desire, not a thought. And what we feel from the majority of people is there's no emotion regarding desiring truth at all for the majority of people we meet. There's only thoughts that they think that way. They think they want to know. But when you start sharing something with them, usually the first result is anger, denial, or resistance, which is proof they didn't want to know. Make sense? And that's the evidence. The emotional evidence that you don't want to know is the response you have to it when you hear it. And the emotional evidence for most people is completely in disharmony with what they thought they would do. So let's say a person comes up and says, can you tell me the next truth? And what they're expecting to hear is, you're a wonderful person, isn't it wonderful? You're doing so well. And that's what they want to hear. But I'm saying to them, you treat women terribly. Almost every woman I've seen you interact with, you've treated them badly. Now, the man who's come up and asked for this wonderful truth he's expecting, which is really a confirmation of his own belief about himself. In other words, he wants a confirmation of his own arrogance. Right? And that's what he thinks the truth will be. And yet when you share something completely different with him, he has a meltdown. The majority of men, firstly, they deny it. Completely deny it. Shift the blame into the women. Say it was all their fault. Oh, it was all to do with my mother. I'm going, no, it's not. It doesn't matter how your mother's treated you. How you treat women is terrible. And it doesn't matter if your mum treated you terribly. That's not a good excuse for you treating women terribly. Right? Deal with the fact that your mum treated you terribly, but at the end of the day, even when you deal with that, you still might not treat women well. Right? Because it's not an automatic thing that you're going to after you release some of your hurt. It's to do with the feelings that the person has as to whether they really want the truth or not. And this is the really substantial thing we've got to bear in mind, is if the feelings don't exist, then it means we don't want what we think we want. If the feelings are not there, then it means we don't want it. So the average person goes, oh, tell me more truth, tell me more truth. And we'll go, you don't actually want to know the truth. In fact, I had one person come to visit me at my home. He came to our studio. He said, I'm here because I want the truth. And the very first thing that I said was, no, you don't. Right? Now, he was within 5 minutes yelling and screaming at me and calling me these names and telling me how bad I was, and he thought I was Jesus before then, but now he doesn't think that at all, and it went on. And not only did it go on and on, we asked him to leave, and he wouldn't even leave our own home, but kept yelling at me. Right? Did he want to know the truth? His emotions are proof that he didn't want to know. Right? And this is the thing, is that a lot of times we think we want But from God's perspective, thinking we want something is not the same as actually wanting it, right? And this is the problem, the substantial problem we have, is that we believe that by having the intellectual thought that it means we really do want it. But for the majority of us, the feelings are proof or evidence that we didn't want it in the first place. Now, the way I see life is that God is showing you every single day the truth that he wants you to know. And every single day, the average person is in complete denial of it, right? And the reason why we are is because we're still treating divine truth as an intellectual process of getting to know some things rather than an emotional process of actually having desires and absorb some things. All right? It's a very different process. So almost everybody, and Mary can, she can attest to this, almost every single person who visits us for the sake of knowing some more truth ends up leaving in a rage. Almost every single person we ever meet. Almost every single person I've ever taught ends up in a rage with me, sooner or later. There was one time, Michael, where even you did, remember? Remember after we went to, where was it, down in Florida, and I said some things and you thought I said some different things, and I actually said, it was only when you listened to the recording, remember, afterwards that you go, oh, he didn't actually say it the way I thought he said it. You remember that?
Usually every truth you tell me I take the wrong way initially, and it may be a long time before I realize
Correct,
that.
and that's the evidence that the desire isn't emotional yet. The fact that we take it the wrong way from the beginning is evidence that the desire isn't emotional yet. So the real thing to work on is, how do I get my desire to be emotional? Well, that's something we'd like to talk about more tomorrow, because tomorrow we want to focus a bit more about how your soul works and what goes on with your soul, and how you can, if without you dealing with some emotional blockages, the truths that you think you know in your head will not ever enter you emotionally. Like, your soul is precluded from even absorbing them while opposite teachings exist. And there's a fundamental spiritual principle that is in in all sorts of areas of the universe, actually, and that is that opposite things can't occupy the same space at the same time. And your soul is a space, and it can't occupy two beliefs at the same time in the space. And if one belief is, I don't really trust God, which is Sai's belief, and another belief is, I want to have a relationship with God, those two beliefs will not occupy the same space. The real feeling is going to be, I don't trust God, so I don't want a relationship with God. That's going to be the real feeling until you get rid of the first one, right? And this is a fundamental scientific principle of how many things, physically and emotionally and spiritually, work in the universe, and yet the average person on earth has no application of that towards themselves emotionally. Does that make sense? So the key thing to bear in mind is, this truth, when I desire it in my heart, I will receive it. But the proviso is, I have to desire it in my heart, in my feelings. That's the proviso. If I don't desire it in my feelings, then whatever is in my feelings will have to go. It'll have to be released until and completely cleared away from my soul. And once that's cleared away from my soul, then I can desire it in my heart. And then I can exercise the desire, and it will actually come to reality, come to pass, right? So the way the soul works is precluding us from having an intellectual thought that actually enters our feelings. Like, the way the soul works is, you cannot have a thought that automatically becomes a feeling. It's never going to happen, particularly when there are so many feelings that are opposite to the thought. The only way to deal with that situation is to get rid of the feelings that are opposite to the thought first. Now, the average person on earth has no idea how to do that either, because that's all about experiencing them to completion. And the average person on earth doesn't want to experience their emotions that are painful to completion. They want to have them for about 30 seconds if possible, maybe a minute. And if you go for any longer than that, you're psychologically distressed and you'd probably need to take some medication, is the general thought on earth, particularly in the Western world where medication is available. There's very few people who are prepared to go through a feeling for like a month or 2 months, if that's what's necessary. And this is why when people hit the spirit world, the first part of their life in the spirit world, if they have any desire for God at all, and there's some who pass with a desire for God soon after they pass, the very first thing they experience is pain and suffering. It's all the pain and suffering that they didn't want to experience on earth. And they go through that. And they go through it for the equivalent of months or even years of earth time, because they didn't want to do that on earth. Right? So they have to do it there. It's the only way you're going to have a relationship. One way or the other, you're going to have to feel the pain and the suffering that comes from sin. But the average person on earth doesn't want to do that. They just want to have this sort of quick sort of response, you know, quick response that goes, this is what I'm going to do. I just do this quick magical thing, and all of a sudden all of these bad feelings that I have will all go, and I'll automatically, magically be all of a sudden accepting of truth. And that's not the way it's going to work. Yeah. Yeah. Is there any spare seats just before we ask any more questions? There's one there and one over there, but can maybe one person, if there's a one, move from one to the other so that because two
the
two
couple
can sit together?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you? Where is two?
That's
Kim and Chang is there. Yeah. So is it possible for?
Have you got two together there?
Is there two together there? Or? Yep. Good on.
Yep. Okay. And just guys, I think someone's phone keeps chiming. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you turn that off, please?
Can we turn that off?
Yeah.
Just onto silent, please. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Up the back on this side, and then up the back on this side. So that's
yep.
Fine.
So Robert. Yep. And Jessica, is it? Boris, if you can.
Yep.
Yep.
Hi.
G'day, Rob.
Is this microphone right? All right.
Yeah,
good.
it's good.
So I'd love to hear some cues that you both use to help you know that you're resisting the truth about yourself. Like
we don't use cues.
Or not cues. I think that might be the wrong word.
Yep.
Like, for example, when I feel pain with something, I'm like, I'm avoiding something. What is it? Or if I get triggered where I want to choose anger, I'm like, there's something.
Even
I'm
the thought that
avoiding.
you're triggered is a sign. But yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anytime
yeah.
you feel cranky or irritated,
Is a sign.
It's a sign you're avoiding the
Yeah.
truth about something.
But can I suggest, each of you have your own methods.
Yeah.
Some of you are like really intellectual, and so you just go into this intellectual banter, similar to what Sai just did with himself about his feelings, right? So some of you do that. Others of you get real emotional about it, like angry, and some of you get vicious. Some of you punish yourself. Some of you hit yourself even. Some of you harm yourself, punish yourself, but others of you harm others. You know, like anybody who shares truth with you, you want to hammer them, you know.
Some people reframe, you know, oh, that's your reality, that's your truth, or actually, you know, I really feel compassionate for that person because really they're hurting and that's why, you know, they've said something, or it's, lots of different methods.
So I'd encourage you, and we did this, I forget which city we did this one in, we encouraged everyone to feel, I think it was Ireland, we encouraged everybody to feel what it's like when they resist.
No, that was...
Was that Ireland?
Chapel Hill.
I was in Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
I'm sure we started doing that in Ireland though.
I don't know, but it was the homework one day.
We've been to so many, we can't remember.
North Carolina.
So what I'd encourage all of you to do is work out your ways that you spend emotionally resisting things.
If you like, fighting for your own sin, that's resisting truth. When you want to justify and rationalise your own sin, when you fight change, that's you rejecting truth.
So every time you want to blame someone, every time you want to rationalise, every time you want to shift, minimise, justify to yourself or someone else, every time you want to just not have the conversation, anytime you just want to walk away, every time you want to not engage one way or the other, every time you get angry, every time, like, there are so many, every time you feel jealous, every time you feel upset, every time you feel bored, every time you feel like doubt, every time you feel, these are all methods.
They're all things you do to...
what you've got to do is look at which one are my favourites. One of my favourite methods.
I think my favourite right now is talking a lot.
Yours is, yeah.
Talking, yeah.
A lot of men is talking and joking about
definitely.
things, yeah?
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank
Using
you, Jesus.
their, getting in their mind and away they go. You know, it's like, well, thinking you understand something that emotionally you're not grasping. A very common thing for men. Men are more prone to it. You've been educated for a much longer time that you're logical, that you're more logical than women are. Not true. Like, a woman who's connected emotionally is more logical than you. But the average man believes he's more logical than a woman who's emotional, right? And in fact, men generally just look down on emotion. In fact, many mothers have taught their sons to not be emotional for lots of different reasons. And so they've taught their own children to be stoic and in their head and all those kind of things. So some of the methods come from your childhood, and some of the methods come from what you like, what you've decided to do for yourself to get over your childhood, right? And the onus is on each of us as individuals to find out what our methods are. What's my pet method of ignoring truth, of getting away from truth, not facing reality in my life. For some of us, it's inactivity. For some of you, it's physical, like drugs, alcohol, plant medicine. As
I
they
don't
call
like
it.
that.
Plant medicine, no such thing as drugs. Like
physical exercise, sometimes.
Physical exercise, what you eat, coffee, tea, you know, or manufactured substance, soda. You know, you call it soda here, don't you? What we call
soft drink.
Soft drink.
At home.
Just there's so many things we use to just get out of the emotion, to get out of the feelings, to get ourselves away from feeling the sin, feeling the pain of our own sin. And when the pain physically gets too much, we even do things like go to a doctor, get some medicine, get a drug, get yourself out of the pain that way. You know, we do all sorts of things. We're just, and usually the more westernized the country is, the more things they do. Because there's more available. It's like, oh, let's go out for dinner. Can be even a way you get out of things, you know. It can be, oh, I'm desperate to have a day off or week off. Can be a way you get out of things, you know. Some people sleep a lot. Some people don't sleep at all. Some people, there's all these methods that people use to get away from themselves and get away from how they truly feel. In other words, get away from ever letting God's truth into their heart. Right? And while those things exist, it's very unlikely you're going to let God's truth into your heart under those circumstances. Yeah.
Thank you. I think I'll mix prayer with that, of course.
Correct.
Like,
yeah.
oh, hey, what is it next that I'm avoiding, or how?
Yeah, it's very good to be prayerfully self-reflective about what am I doing to avoid the absorption of truth into my heart. And for many times what you'll do is you'll start recognizing all these corruptions of your faith, you know, all the beliefs that you have that cause you to sort of reject things that come into your life regularly. And most people on earth do that because it's just a way to avoid some pain, a way to avoid suffering from the effects of their sin. So the problem we experience on earth generally is that we have effects of our sin that are painful, but the majority of people on earth feel like, well, I want to avoid my pain as much as possible, so what I'm going to do is do a lot of things to avoid even my own acknowledgement of my own pain, right? Now, you're not going to have that luxury after a while in the spirit world. That luxury might be available to you here, but eventually you're going to have to come to experience pain and suffering of your sin. That's going to happen in your future. It's a guarantee. Any sin you commit, there will be pain and suffering associated with it, and it is guaranteed you are going to go through it. Now, of course, if you repent for it, it's a lot easier. But if you fight it, it's a lot harder. And that will depend on you too, as to whether you'll repent for it or want to work through it, or whether you're going to fight it. If you fight it, it's just going to be worse.
Cheers. Thank you.
No worries.
Hey guys.
Yep.
In terms of discovering God's truth, I love to kind of share just right now what like my process is and what that.
I'd not want to hear them.
Yeah, and we should say, guys, when you put up your hand, it's for questions. We've been a bit.
Yeah, can I say to you guys about questions? This has been a problem on our Thai trip. You are my guests. I asked you for questions, not for your beliefs, not for your statements, but questions.
Can I rephrase? I'm sorry.
Are you going to turn it into a question?
No,
Is it a
had
real
question? I think I kind of didn't start the right.
Yeah, but can I just say generally, every time you don't ask questions and you just make statements, you are forcing unloving behaviour on everyone else in the group. This is unloving. It's an unloving act to do this. And you do it because you're addicted to people listening to you about your problems rather than solving your problems yourself. Do you understand? And this is a very common thing, particularly in Western countries. It's like, I want to tell you my process so that all of you can share in my process, and some of you may benefit, but none of them are asking, right? Now, you're here, I'm assuming, to listen to what Mary and I are going to present. Is that why you're here? Because if that's not why you're here, then you should leave right now, because that's why we're here. And if you're not going to do that, then what's the point of being here? You didn't come here to have somebody else force their opinions on you. You came here to learn some truths that Mary and I are going to present. You didn't come here to listen to everybody else's personal experience. Now, you can do that in your break, or tonight, or tomorrow morning. You can come early and ask everybody else about their personal experience and tell them yours if that's what you want to do unlovingly. Of course, forcing it your own personal experience on another person is an unloving act. They've got enough problems of their own, right? Without having to deal with yours as well. So you got to bear that in mind if you were loving. You're here because we've invited you and we want you to ask questions. So what's your question?
Okay, so the question is, got it. So the question is, how do you know you've arrived to the actual truth? Is it that it feels emotionally and it feels in harmony with love emotionally, and it's logical as well? Like, and you just keep asking questions until you get to that point. Like,
well, the answer to the question is fairly long, and I don't know if I want to spend the time doing it now because it's a distraction for what I want to teach this weekend. But there are many, many ways in which you would know that what you're doing is in harmony with truth. You will become happier. And it won't be just happiness in terms of I'm instantly happier because I met an addiction. It's going to be long-term happier. You're also going to have the law of attraction show you, because the law of attraction will no longer bring you any event which causes you distress anymore, right? There's a lot of other reasons, there are other ways you can tell. But rather than going into them here, we need to first establish some fundamental faith about, are we just going to do that in the first place?
Are we going to seek the truth? Yeah.
Like, why worry about measuring the results when we're not even worried about living in a truthful manner in our personal life? The results are going to be pain until you live in a truthful manner in your personal life. And so I would rather focus you on what is the important thing to do first, and then I can guarantee to you that the results will be good. And there'll be all sorts of results that you won't have even understood at the time you began. But they'll be good.
And
right?
In terms of, I think your question was about how do you know you've actually got the truth? What Jesus said applies to that. But you know, it's a state of your heart to seek the truth. You know, so it's not that. Like there might be times in your future where you think, I know what the truth is and this is the truth. But if you are then set on that and you're going to...
now you're answering the question though.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I don't want to answer
Which is what you
it.
want to do.
No,
okay,
no.
sorry, hon.
Over here. Thanks.
Takes too long, doesn't it? I was about to start. I'm like, oh no, it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as a parent, how would you go about, or how should I better go about respecting my son's free will without like putting my own stuff on him? I try to give him as much like what I would want, I would have wanted as a young man. How do I?
Well, that's very dangerous.
That's tricky. Yeah.
That's very dangerous because a lot of what you would have wanted as a young man were the things you missed out on as a young man. And then because you haven't felt about missing out on them, you often will react in a knee-jerk reaction to what you've missed out on and try to provide all of that to your child, when actually that also could be sin that you're now encouraging the child to imbibe. However, it's off topic. And
Sorry, go ahead.
What I would like to do first is focus on some fundamental principles, because if you focus on the principles, then you'll understand how free will works for yourself first, and then once you understand in yourself how free will works, then you'll also understand what you would like other people to do to you is what you'll do to them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So the average person goes, well, how do I treat my son? Well, if you don't understand how God treats you as his son, then can you see you're not going to appropriately treat your son in the same manner?
Okay.
So the real answer to the question is, I need first to learn for myself how free will works. Once I understand it myself, now when it comes to treating my son in a manner that's in harmony with his will, but also teaching him, I'll be able to do that well. And if you look at God, God does not pander to you. When you get angry with him, he doesn't pander you. He doesn't listen to you when you're angry with him, does he? In the sense he doesn't act upon it. He doesn't go, oh, you know, my son down there is having a tantrum, so I'm going to give him a lolly. You know, I'm going to give him a candy because he's having a tantrum. I'll just pacify him. That's not how God works, and so that's also not how we would work with our children. But God has also provided laws. So when you say, I don't want to live by law, God says, too bad. These are my laws. Like, you're going to be living by them because they're my laws and they're permanent. They're enforced by principles. And if you don't live by them, there's going to be pain that comes along as a result if you don't live by them. And so once you understand that is also part of how God wishes you to exercise your will, then you can also start to apply that to your son, right? And so once you grasp God's way, you could say, for yourself, now when it comes to bringing up a child, you can now bring up the child in harmony. You can teach the child to be in harmony with that way. But if you yourself don't grasp it emotionally, and I mean it needs to be like in your heart, if you don't grasp it emotionally, can you see you'll be prone to asking somebody else, how do I do this, and how do I do that, and how do I do this, and how do I do that? And many people will come up with lots of different suggestions, many of which are going to be problematic. And so you end up still sinning with regard to the way you treat your child, right? So our recommendation, this is, the majority of you don't get yet, that if I live by the principle, every question in my life will be resolved. How do I treat my children? How do I treat my partner? How do I treat my friends? How do I treat the environment? All of these questions get resolved if you live by the principle. But see, most of us feel, oh, but my problem is more urgent than that. Do you understand? Like, my son's growing up while this is happening. No, like, I'm, you know, like he's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 now.
He's 15.
Yeah, 15 now. Like, oh, God, 15. Like, you know, he's already had 15 years of indoctrination of my principles, right? But if you think about he's growing up, and every new year you go, more panic, more, you know, like how do I enable free will versus how do I love him versus how do I create laws that are loving to me, and all these questions come about. And the reason why those questions are still there inside of us is because the principles of the law are not there inside of us. So that means we now must be reliant on somebody else to answer those questions for us. That makes sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it makes sense.
It'd be better, wouldn't it, if that once those principles were inside of you, You wouldn't need to ask anybody those questions. You'd know exactly every single situation. Your son does one thing, you know exactly what to do. You know, like son leaves his clothes on the floor, right? And you've told him how many times to not do that on your floor. Told him how many times to not do that. Well, any more than once is too many, because God only tells you once, right, in terms of not to do something, and then there's a penalty. So what's the penalty? Clothes are on the floor, you bought the clothes, they're yours, pick them up, take them away, no longer have them. There's a penalty. Give them to the op shop or something. Right? And the average parent goes, I can't do that. But this is what God does. God does not allow us to continue bad behaviour without a penalty for breaking the law. Right? And God doesn't tell you over and over again either that you've broken the law. In fact, he doesn't even tell you once that you broke it. There's just an instant penalty when you break it. Right? That's how God acts. That's what love is. Anything other than that's not love. But see, if I feel that, I will know that. Right? But if I don't feel that, I'll go, oh, but I've got to give him a chance. Oh, and then in the end you give him one chance and another chance, and what does the child learn? 5 chances later. That doesn't mean what he says. I can just keep doing it. My mum's going to pick it up and she's going to put it in the washing for me. He knows that straight away, right? Because that's what he's getting taught. And this is why, you know, I love the way God it reacts with us, but also in the process of having that enter your heart, you can then react the same way with others. And you'll know what to do every single situation. You'll know when to have compassion or understanding. When I say compassion or understanding, I mean more when to allow for the fact that a person's learning versus no, rigid here. So God does allow for your learning, and there's less penalty when you're learning, as long as the learning is sincere. God doesn't have as harsh penalties when the learning is sincere but you make a mistake. But if you do something on purpose, the law is like full on to the full amount of severity every single time. And the reason why is because the law has been constructed to respond to purposeful behaviour. So when your child engages purposeful behaviour, or you do, the law is the same. It's like it's going to correct you in the same purposeful manner. So when the law is in your heart, you will feel these things as a parent. And the big problem we face with most of our day-to-day problems is we go, but if I apply the principle, it might take me a year to get that principle. It might take, what if it takes me 5 years? My kid's 20 then. Like, I need to know the answer now. Just tell me the answer now. But can you see, if the answer isn't in your heart, you're not going to apply it anyway. Not the way God would. So in the end, it's difficult just providing the answer. When it's not in your heart, you're going to misapply that to somebody else, for sure.
And you won't be able to apply it to different situations, will you?
No.
Yeah. It's funny how we have we sort of have urgency on the parenting, but we don't have urgency on the principle, get the principle inside of me. And yet,
and this is a very important thing I'd like to say. If you had urgency on the principle, can you see all the problems would be solved in the most economical manner?
Yeah, but because I'm not worried about the principle, I'm in a rush the whole time to get the quick, easy way, I guess.
Exactly.
Correct.
It's exactly what I was about to say. Everyone wants the quick way without seeing that get the principle is the quickest way.
Yeah, and also the so-called quick way isn't quick.
Yeah.
You know, when you say you want the quick way, that's the slowest way, because it's not in your heart yet. And because it's not in your heart yet, every time a new situation comes up, you'll be there, oh, what do I do now? What do I do now? You won't have instant reaction anymore, because you have to, every day, every decision you make, you'll have to ponder about for a few days first.
Or
you have to think about it for a few days first.
If you don't, make a quick one, and then you'll be like, that was wrong. Oh no, now I've got to correct that, and or it feels very painful, or I don't know how it was wrong, but it seems like it could be half right and maybe wrong.
But let's be honest too, the more the soul's in sin, the more likely every quick decision is going to be wrong as well.
Every decision.
Every decision is going to be wrong, because it's all based on the sin. right? So unless the principles inside the heart change, that, by the way, is the most economical thing to do, every other question we're faced with is going to be difficult to resolve. And we'll be inconsistent.
Appreciate that.
With it every single time, So one day with your son you'll do this, and the next day you go, I don't know whether that was right, and so you'll try something else the next day. But when the principle is in your heart, you know what's right, and you'll just do it every single time. And the child, in its response, will get to go, Dad means this. Not Dad's going to change his mind tomorrow, but that principle, that's firm inside of Dad. And once it's firm inside of Dad, your child's going to feel, that's firm inside of Dad. Now I'm just butting my head against a brick wall all the time. Yeah. And so they'll make correction.
Yeah. And I think a lot of parents don't, because you've not experienced it yourself, but, when you're firm for a principle and loving, children feel so able to grow and learn in that environment.
Yep.
They feel it's like a sense of sort of security, like a safety. It's a true safety. Love and truth do create the true safety. But, they feel like, here's an environment for my learning, because here's that boundary, it's always there. Here's that other boundary, it's always there. But along with that boundary comes the love as well. It's not punitive or shaming or anything. And so children flourish in that kind of environment. We just don't see it on earth. Because,
Well, mind you, we have seen it a few times.
Yeah, we do see it we've occasionally.
Got some friends, like our friend Eloisa in Australia. She's a managing director of God's Way in Australia. She's just put on the net a series of videos that you might be interested in.
Yeah, you might.
Which are about parenting, like in harmony with God's way.
Yeah.
And the main reason why she's done that is because we've spent a lot of time with her doing that with her, and her children are benefiting from that a lot. Yeah.
And the more she develops and more she imbibes those principles from God, the more we see changes in her children, who are now nearly all teenagers. Yeah,
all teenagers now.
She's 12, I think. But
appreciate it. Yeah. So you said it was the way. What is the video?
Eloisa.
If you have a look at Mary's blog,
do you know? Yeah, if you go to mary.divinetruth.com, I put it up recently. I can't remember the name
of the blog. Your blog.
No, but it's the second or third one there if you scroll down. But
it's only
she knows it.
It's only a month or so ago.
Yeah, it's only a month or so ago. But I'm trying to remember. Yeah. Eloise's YouTube, but I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah. So the reason why I said all that is that the way God does it is that God's always trying to teach you emotionally a thing. And unless I change emotionally, any intellectual choice and decision I will make is going to be fraught with my misinterpretation of using my intellect. It's going to have misinterpretation of the emotional truth of something every single time, because my intellect is going to be incapable of understanding the principles associated with God's truths, right? And so this is the big problem most of us face, is we're in our mind a lot, thinking all the time, thinking, this sounds good, I'm going to try to apply it, but it's all in our mind. And at the end of the day, we think we're making progress, but actually the progress to be made, the lies, the error that's inside of our soul, that's inside of our feelings, has to leave me so that I can absorb the truth from God inside of my soul, so it's now with me. So the truth will be with me only when the lies leave me. Yeah. And those two processes are emotional. The release of the lie is an emotional process, as well as the imbibing of the truth, another emotional process. Yeah. And where were we? We were...
No, we weren't anywhere. Boris,
yeah. Let's go to Boris.
Yeah. So my question is the relationship between motivation and the principles when they're out of harmony with each other.
Well, I would say that's a misunderstanding of a principle. So the question Boris has asked is, what happens when your motivation seems to be in disharmony, right, with the principle? Then it means the principle, you're not understanding the principle. So let's look at, for example, the principle of humility. What is that principle? What does that look like?
To feel everything honestly at the moment.
See, now you're just repeating what I've already said too. Right? So, aren't you? What do you feel it feels like, is what I'm saying.
I got you. So humility for me is to take responsibility to all of my experiences without putting them on anyone else.
For what kind of experiences?
All of them.
What do you mean by all of them?
So whatever I'm feeling, so all of my feelings.
So your emotions?
Emotions, beliefs. Motivations.
Yeah. So when you say you're responsible for them, what does that mean?
Accountable.
Yes, accountable is a good word. What does it mean to be accountable for your beliefs?
To see the impact they have and to be truthful to myself about that.
What about where they came from, the cause?
To build a desire to unpack, discover, and again take responsibility for where they come from.
Well, they come from you.
Right. Yes. Sure.
Do they not?
Yes.
Your beliefs are your beliefs, are they not?
Yes.
They come from you.
Yes.
You've created them for lots of different reasons. Now, some people may have influenced their creation, but substantially they're yours.
Correct.
And same as your emotions. They come from you too. They're not like because mum and dad treated you badly or anything like that. The emotions are yours. They're your creations. They come from you. So to be accountable means that I, at the deepest emotional level, understand that every feeling I have and every belief I have, every thought I have comes from me. It's my responsibility. Now, there are influences upon them from my past, but I developed them over time. I came to develop them through the process of living, through the process of having an experience. So yes, being responsible for all that is a part of humility. Not the only part of humility, though. Because what if you are responsible for them and they all happen to be wrong? They all happen to be out of harmony with love.
Well, you're responsible for discovering whether they're right or wrong.
So when I say responsible for discovering, so it's my responsibility.
Can I say it's my desire?
You could say, that's not the same as desire though, is it?
Because all this sounds like a job to me.
This all sounds job to me, responsible, accountable,
heavy.
responsible. It sounds to me like I don't want to do it. You understand? Which is how you feel, isn't it? You don't really want to do it sometimes, right?
Sometimes.
Yeah. So that's not the same as desire, is it? So what if I said...
Yeah.
These pieces are pretty hard. Desire. I desire.
Now, to be accountable for.
No, let's personalise this. My emotions, beliefs, and I desire to be accountable for them. Desire. Passion.
Yeah.
I long for that.
It's like really
Right.
precious to me.
My responsibility...
To find, that was about the origins of the things,
Yeah.
the causes.
My desire to find the origins, which are really the truth about the thing. Yeah?
Yeah.
What else? The biggest problem we have with humility, what is it? Planet-wide.
Missing.
It's missing, yeah. But what?
Letting go of control.
That's the biggest problem. My position in the universe. What do I mean by that? What do you reckon I mean, Boris, by that?
So recognizing the level of sin that I'm living in. So like
no, but that's one thing, of course, but that's not what I mean by that. Can we have a few stabs? Let's go to Samir in front of you. Samir's had the advantage of listening to the last two talks.
The hierarchy
of whom?
Of where I stand in relationship to God.
Okay, particularly in relation to God. Yeah. In other words,
who's the daddy?
I am a created being. Right? God is my daddy.
And mummy.
And mummy. I hardly know anything. In fact, I would almost put, I almost know nothing. It's probably a better way of putting it. You know, when you began life on this earth, right from the time you were conceived, you knew nothing at all. And from then, mostly you've been taught whatever everybody else knows from then, which is also next to nothing. So by the time you got to this age, you pretty much know next to nothing, right? And it's good for me to know that. It's good for me to know that I know next to nothing.
Yeah.
Because when I know, if I understand I know next to nothing, I'm not going to go around raving on to Mary how much I know and raving on to you how much I know about this and that. And, you know, we were talking with somebody this morning who was doing that. And I'm not going to do that because humility sort of, if I'm humble, I'd realise God's infinite, I'm finite, I'm a creation. I'm not God. So, very important. I hardly know nothing. So that's a lot more opposed to just saying, I am not God. Which is also a truth. I'm not God. But not only am I not God, I'm almost like an ant compared to God. In the sense that while I'm the pinnacle of God's creations, compared to what God knows, I know nothing, next to nothing. Right? Now, of course, the only time I knew nothing was the moment I was created as a soul, and the moment I incarnated on this earth. I knew nothing then. And from that time on, I've been learning. But a lot of the things I've been learning, God didn't teach me, people on earth taught me. So they think they know something, but often they know nothing too. So you got people who know nothing teaching other people to know nothing. That's life on earth to a large degree, right? Isn't it? In terms of what God knows is true versus what we are getting taught, when it's not only that we're getting taught nothing either, we're getting taught lies, which is worse than nothing.
It is.
Because the problem with lies is it prevents you from even thinking that you need to discover a truth, right? That's the trouble with a lie, is the lie that makes it look like it's the truth. So not only do you know nothing, but you know the opposite of truth, which is lies. That's what you know. And the more you sprout about it, the more you know. Right?
So then my question is regarding action, because if I know nothing,
yep.
and even if I think I know something,
most of the time you
don't know anything.
That's right.
And essentially I'm taking action and learning through the process of action. But
No. See, that's one way to learn. It's not the most efficient. The most efficient way to learn is that God knows everything, I know nothing, so what's the most efficient way to learn? Ask God. Now I'll know more, right? And it will be true. Not something that I've experimented with and come up with a whole heap of experiments that don't include all the information, right? When I ask God, God knows. So the fastest way for you to know something is to have that relationship with God.
Right.
Experimenting is the slowest way for you to know. It's the next fastest way, you could say, but not quite the slowest way. The slowest way to learn is to do nothing. Right. You know, that's the slowest way, of course, because it means you're not going to learn anything then, right? So you're far better off trying to learn something through experiment than you are learning nothing, right? But substantially, Experimenting is a very slow method. Like I've got friends in the spirit world, they experimented for years and years and years and years. You know, some of my friends that you would know from the Bible, like Elias and Daniel and those kind of Ezekiel and Jeremiah and these kind of friends that we have in the spirit world, they experimented for years and years and years and years and years and years. And, you know, they were around 2,500 to 3,500 years before I came to earth. And they were experimenting for years. Same as Amon and Aman, like 180,000 years they experimented, close to, right? And in the end they knew next to nothing still, right? It was only by them having a relationship with God that they started to learn something, right? So humility, part of humility is understanding my position in the universe. Like, if I understand I'm the creature, I'm the creation, I'm not God. I don't know everything. In fact, I barely know anything at all. And when I first came here, I knew nothing. So the reality is, even if I'm 70 now or 80 now, all I know is 80 years of experience, most of which has been in an earth in error. Most of that experience has been all error. And therefore, not things that I know. I just know the error. But I don't know the truth, right? So I've still known next to nothing, right? And I'm not God. This is a very important part of humility, the quality of humility, right? The reason why, you know, at some point, remember we did this, I think it was in Ireland. That was in Ireland,
That was
yes.
in Ireland,
where we asked the attendees to go home and think about what the principle or the quality of humility is, what it feels like, right? And in the end, we wrote a whole heap of things on the board, and then we got so distracted from the conversation that we never got to answer what it was actually like. And in the end, there was just a whole heap of things on the board, a lot of which were not humility, right? Because what people thought were humility, but not. But here's one of the main things about humility: understanding my relationship in terms of me, the being in the universe. Now, my relationship to you is equal. But my relationship to God is created being versus creator who knows everything, right? Now, if I really perceive and understand my relationship with God, can you see that's going to help me stay humble? Can you see that? It's going to help me be humble in every situation if I understand that. But if I start to think, oh, I know a fair bit, I've been on this earth now for 60 years, I know a lot. Right? And you start thinking that way, can you see the arrogance will grow, and therefore your resistance to absorbing new information will decrease. And this is why when you meet some people in the sixth sphere of the spirit world who've been around 5,000 years, their arrogance is pretty intense sometimes, particularly with regard to their relationship with God. So they think they're equal to you, but when it comes to their relationship with God, they still don't know that they hardly know anything, which is a major fundamental flaw in their future. If they understood that, they'd seek information from God instead of trying to just do it through experimentation. Now, it is true that a person who is humble will experiment, but the very first thing they'll experiment with is
God.
Their relationship with God. That makes logical sense, doesn't it? Bearing in mind that God would provide information. If you could connect with God, then that information can be provided. So very important to understand some issues about quality. Now that's only one. The reason why I wanted to focus on that is that the average person on earth does not understand a fundamental principle about humility, and that is their relative position to God. They don't understand that. They don't grasp that. The average person on earth actually thinks themselves to be God. They think themselves as their own lawmaker, and therefore they think themselves to be God. Right? And this is the problem we have on earth, is that frequently we go, I know what humility is, but if I don't understand my position with God, then I've got no grasp on humility at all as a quality. None at all. Right? I've got no understanding of it in any way if I don't get that one principle. Now, of course, in humility, there's literally hundreds of principles. You could say hundreds of sub-aspects to the quality of humility. Now, in the past, all I've done is mention one of them, which is the desire to feel and experience all of your emotions, whether they are painful or pleasurable. That's one aspect of humility. That's all I've mentioned at this stage. But there's hundreds of parts to humility, of which one we've mentioned. Now, we did mention some others. Mary and I did have a series of conversations which were recorded, I think it was 2013 or thereabouts, about qualities of humility. And I think we had 5
interviews. It was a long time.
It was a long time ago.
But we spent a long time talking.
We spent a long time. We spent hours, probably 25 hours of video, which is talking about the quality of humility and sub-aspects to the quality of humility, right? But it's not complete. It's not complete because the more you feel from God, the more you even feel about what it means to have humility with God, which is interesting, right? Yeah. So you can tell the people who don't have a relationship with God, because the ones who don't have a relationship with God don't have humility. They act like they know everything all the time, right? They don't have humility. Very important part of humility. Now, can you see why I've said that?
Yes.
So you're mentioning humility being important, which it is, but there's not an understanding of what it is. Right. So we can use a word with our mind that sort of says, I think this is what I need, but at the same time, with our heart, not understand what that really feels like. To actually understand humility, I'm going to have to feel what it feels like that God is my authority. For the average man on earth, that's pretty hard because they think of God as Father and then they think of their relationship with their own father and they think, oh, well, I'm in a competition with my father, I'm trying to prove myself to my father or I'm angry with my father one way or the other. And so, when it comes to thinking of God as my father, there's the underlying feeling is one of anger more than anything else. And so there's not a soul-based feeling of understanding my relationship to God. Does that make sense, Boris? Now, if I understand my relationship to God, can you see there's another thing that's going to come about? So let me just write that off for a moment. Another thing that's going to happen is this. I'll realise that my opinions don't matter. And not only will I realise that in my mind, but I'll actually feel they don't matter. I'm allowed to have them. A part of being humble is having them. So, I have an opinion of what's going to happen in the future to the earth. Right? That's my opinion. I've got no idea, really. They're just opinions, some of which have been coming from thoughts from God, feelings from God, and so I have to think about those pretty deeply, really, but they're still opinions. My opinions, if I understand and this is how Mary knows I feel, my opinions don't matter. You ask me my opinion, and I'm almost going like, why are you asking me for my opinion? They don't matter. It's pointless asking me what my opinion is. None of my opinions matter. Do you understand? Like, what I think about Trump versus what I think about Harris doesn't matter. You've got an election next week, right? Yeah, what I think about it doesn't matter. Right? What God thinks about it matters. And as long as I can absorb some feelings from God, I'll understand what's going on. And in fact, when you do absorb some feelings from God about your upcoming election, you realise that both sides are just about as each other. Right? Because on one side, you've got breaking of laws with regard to things like, Mary and I had a discussion about this yesterday. So on Trump's side, you've got breaking laws like relating to care of the environment, relating to how he treats women, how he treats people of different races.
His aspiration, his love of evil.
Love of evil, love of wealth.
Dominance, power.
Love of dominance, power, lots of other things, right? Big problems there, right? So, all unloving. Then on the other hand, you've got Harris.
Yeah, what are the problematic
where's the unloving
issues?
problems there? You've got, promotion of abortion, promotion of war, promotion of sex change operations, like people changing their gender, allowance of bad behaviour, sin, right, in the guise of political correctness. Dishonesty. Both of them have that, right? Both of them have that. Okay, so now I see your problem. You in Australia we have to vote. Here you don't have to, I gather. Is that right? It's a voluntary process, I gather. But let's say you wanted to vote. Who do you vote for? It's like, there's two completely unloving philosophies being presented to you, and you're being asked to choose one from the other. Right? But they're all unloving. It's a hard. You can't make a choice, can you? There's two unloving premises there.
But some of you I speak to go, oh yeah, I don't even think about that stuff because I don't vote. I just bow out of that. But is that loving?
No. Having no action is not loving either.
Having no awareness or no engagement with things that are happening around you in your country
is not loving.
It's not loving either. Mm.
So a person would care about these matters. But if I go, my opinions don't matter, what matters is God's opinions. Can you see I'll be able to make really good decisions? Can you see that? Like I'll be able to go, yeah, see that's happening there, not God's truth. That's happening there, not God's truth. I can't agree with both of these, so I've got to say something about it. Give us a better candidate who's more in harmony with God's truth on every level. Not, and if somebody else doesn't want to be that candidate, well, what about you? Like, you all complain, it seems, in America, that how much money it requires to become a president. How about trying to become a president when you have no money and see how that goes? See what happens there. You might be surprised, right? Right. Is it right to even have a president? Is your form of democracy a democracy? So how do you change your democracy to be an actual democracy? You could ponder all of these things, couldn't you? You can't provide solutions unless you yourself have worked through the questions. Right?
And the feelings that you have,
the feelings.
Being humble, my opinions, why does one candidate or one party appeal to me more than another when they're both unloving? There's reasons for that. Obviously, I'm out of harmony with God's
laws
truth.
Some way or another, if one appeals to me and one doesn't.
So if I really want to have a solution, then I'm going to have to work through whatever in me is the sin in me that appeals.
And once I've worked through the sin in me, I'll be able to come up, I've got a great form of democracy. I already know the form of democracy that's going to be the best form of democracy that's ever been on earth. Right? But it doesn't help you if I know it. And I don't know it because I know it. I know it because God's shown me it. Like, I've been educated by the principles to understand what the best would be. Right? Now, I'm not going to get involved in the conversation about that because there's principles we've got to talk about. But can you see, my opinions don't matter. What matters is God's truth matters. That's what matters. Right? So if God's truth is I'm looking at a situation external to myself and I'm going, there's a whole heap of unloving things there, and there's a whole heap of unloving things there, and there's a whole heap of untruthful things there, and there's a whole heap of untruthful things there, and then somebody says to me, make a decision between the two things. I'm going, that's impossible. It's all unloving. I can't make a decision between those two things. That's all unloving. Give me some other option. Or me create another option would even be more worthy, wouldn't it? Yeah. But until I understand that, I don't have humility. Until I feel that, I won't have humility. I've got to feel that. These are feelings, not thoughts. Right? So When it comes to examining a principle, can you see there's a lot involved in it? And every principle, so Mary and I often talk about 4 main principles, right? Love, truth, humility, faith. And you could put action in there, 5th main principle. You look at those 5 principles, there is a huge amount of aspects to each one of them, far beyond what the average person on earth is even considered is a part of those things. And it is up to us to desire them enough to understand them, because the beautiful thing about desiring them enough is that once you understand them, you can apply them to everything. And so every decision that might have taken you weeks before takes minutes or seconds now, because you understand the principles are written on your heart. So anytime you're in a situation, the principles are already in action in the situation. There's not even a thought to it anymore. I'm just going to act on the principle because it's already there in action, inside of me, in action, inside of me. And as a result, being inside of me means now I can act it immediately without thought, which is our goal, really. Get to the stage where you act in a loving manner without thought, right? If you've got to think about it, it means you're not yet there. Somebody asked earlier, how do I measure whether I'm there yet? And that's one way of measuring. If I've got to think about it, then I'm not there yet. If I've got to think about what's loving and I don't know, then obviously it means that in my heart, what's loving isn't there yet.
So do you wait to take action until you know? Because otherwise you're assuming.
Well, that'd be wise, wouldn't it? But there's sort of an in-between part, isn't there? There's I need to experiment a bit versus I now know. So experimenting is, the beautiful thing with God is you can go, okay, I'm going to try this action and I'm going to feel your feelings about me trying this action. Right? And in the process, you'll feel how God feels about it. And you go, oh, God's got some doubts about this action. So why? Now, God's not going to tell me why until I want to know why, because that's an aspect of desire. So I can't just go, why is my action bad? Because without in my mind, because at the end of the day, I'm still not got a desire to really know. So I'd have to go, okay, I can feel that there's something wrong here with what God's showing me. I need to go through, well, why do I feel something's wrong but I don't know what is? What's the problem with that? I need to seek that truth. Now, there's a lot of ways I can do that. There's a lot of ways you can experiment with truth to find out whether something is true or not. But I wouldn't put it off. I wouldn't go, I haven't got a clear answer, so I don't know, so I should take no action, or I'll take the action anyway because I don't have a clear answer. Well, that's not very wise. It would be best to resolve why the clear answer isn't present first before taking the action. So that's what it means to experiment, to go through the process of finding out why you're feeling from God that something is not quite right. Finding out why, seeking the truth of it. God's not going to magically give you that truth, because at the end of the day, if God did, you would not be a seeking person. You would go, where's the next one? Give me the next one. Oh yeah, no worries. Go and do that. It's not driven by your desire anymore, right? It's just tell me the next thing and I'll do that. Tell me the next thing and I'll do that. And you'll be like, tell me the next thing and I'll do that. Sort of zombie-like, tell me the next thing and I'll do that type of thing. That's not what God wants you to become. God wants you to come to understand the truth and why it's the truth and how good it is and how powerful it is and how wonderful it is and how loving it is. And he wants you to want that for yourself, not because he forced it upon you or because he told you or because, but rather because you wanted to have that information for yourself. That's the only way I know what I now know, which has got nothing to do with my opinion, but rather about what God's taught me. That's the only way I've come to know it, by seeking it first before anything else. Any of you who know your Bible will know that I said, seek first the kingdom and all of these other things will be added to you. Right? Seek it. The operation isn't seek first the kingdom, it's seek first the kingdom. Learn how to seek first. And what you're seeking first should be anything to do with God's kingdom, right? Seek it first, though. Do that first. Like, in other words, work on your desire first. That's a part of humility, desire. Yep.
Thank you. So my new definition is developing a passionate desire to seek truth and receive it from God. So
yes, and also to understand your position is that you know nothing, next to nothing, and God knows everything. And in fact, a lot of what we know is actually completely false, isn't it? It's not just nothing, it's false, which is worse than nothing, if you think about it. If we just knew nothing, we'd probably not do some of the things we currently do that are wrong. But because we think we know things that are true, that we think are true but are false, we act upon what's false, and that's worse. To our own detriment. That's what happens in that case. So, yeah, it's better to understand that all of us have been brought up in this world, and I've said many times before, those of you who've heard it, that the world is in the hells. We were brought up in the hells. We know what the hells have taught us. That's what we know. And a lot of it's error, unloving error. And that's what we know, what we think we know. But we just know how to sin good, really. That's what we know well. Yeah. Of course, God doesn't value our sin very much. Aside from the fact He's saying to us that it makes you unhappy. Aside from that, He doesn't value it. It's not His creation. He doesn't have to destroy it. You do. Right? So, yeah, these are important things to understand about the quality of humility. But that wasn't your question, so let's answer your question. Do you remember your question?
Intention, motivation, and principle. So, if for example, the kid drops the clothes on the floor, I'm angry. The principle says I need to take it because God would have a consequence.
Well, no, the first principle is you deal with your anger. Why are you angry?
Humility, yeah.
Yeah, see a person who's truly loving the child wouldn't feel angry about it. They'd just pick up the clothes and put it in the rubbish bin. Or give it away to somebody who would need it. It would be my better course of action. So say you didn't want it, you left it on the floor, so I'm giving it to your brother. It's not yours anymore, it's your brother's. And if the brother did the same, pick up the brother and go, okay, it goes to the opportunity shop or whatever.
So then ask God for the truth about your motivation and be humble.
Yeah, well,
to
if
that.
you're angry, your motivation's automatically bad. Right. So you shouldn't need to ask God about that one. Right. Does that make sense? If you're angry and you're doing something in your anger, your motivation's already bad. So don't do it. Work through your motivation first, right? So with a lot of things, we already know our motivation is bad. Example of that is if my motivation is my motivation is already bad. In other words, if my motivation is not to be humble, it's already bad. And this is why I brought up humility, because if your motivation isn't humble, it is automatically unloving. So if your motivation is to get angry, then you're automatically unloving. If your motivation is to punish someone, you're automatically being unloving. If your motivation is to teach them, well, that is a more humble motivation, isn't it? But it has to be first to teach yourself before them, doesn't it?
To be taught.
Because otherwise I'm a hypocrite. And if I'm a hypocrite, my motivation's not good. That's like me being a father saying, don't smoke, son. That is obviously not going to work. My son's going to look at me smoking and going, what are you talking about, Dad? Like, why are you smoking? Why doesn't this law apply to you as well as to me? So I'm there coming home, sitting down, expecting my wife to cook and clean for me. So when my son does it, and I try to stop him from doing it, he'll go, Dad, you do it all day, every day. You do that every day. And Dad says, oh, but I go to work. So I go to school. Why can't I do it? Right? And so, while I haven't yet worked on myself, I'm going to be showing my children and showing other people around me the unloving behaviour.
But the principle, Boris, principle and motivation are not two separate entities. If you think about sin and truth, or sin and principle, the sin within you drives your motivations. The principle within you drives your motivations. And
the priority system internally determines which one you'll do first.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you mean by that? I lost that. Yeah.
Right. So Mary just said the sin within you drives your motivations, and the truth within you will drive motivations. All right. Desire, passion for principles. As to which one you do first will determine what priority you're placing on them. So if your sin is a priority, you're going to do that first every time. Whether you understand a principle or not, you're going to do your sin every time. If internally your priority is I want to uphold the truth, the principle every time, you'll not sin, even though you want to. You won't. Because it's saying it's against the principle. It's against the principle. So a lot of it is it's not just about learning what is true and what is false, it's also what priority are you going to place on it. Right? Yep.
Yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, that's clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So if you look at the majority of us, what we do is we say, right, I get the principle, right, and I understand what my sin is on the other side of the principle, but for the most part I still sin. Why do I do that? It's because my internal priority system is up the creek. It's wrong. It's incorrect. I'm thinking the sin is going to benefit me still somehow. So even though I know the principle, I'm living out of harmony with it. That's silly, right? So obviously it must be driven by a corrupt faith that says living by the principle doesn't matter as much as living by the sin does. Right?
And when I fully have the principle within me, then I will no longer be drawn to sin.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
If you fully have the principle within you, then you'd understand your sin is not worth acting upon anymore.
You wouldn't be motivated. You wouldn't be a draw. Yeah. When you're in this situation, this is when you're starting that emotional engagement with God and coming to seek the principle.
Yeah, remember, it's this, isn't it? It's hearing the truth, the universal truth, and going, maybe I should do something about it, right?
Yep. Yeah. And then there's sort of this thing that goes on between your sin and how much do I want to seek the principle or seek my sin. But eventually, once the principle is within you, say the principle of humility is within you, when you see the child's stuff on the floor and you feel angry, you're like, well, I've got to feel, I can't do anything else but be humble here. Yeah. And eventually you won't even be angry because you'll feel whatever the anger was trying to cover.
Yeah. And then once you're humble, you know, well, I don't even feel upset about it at all. Could I still pick it up and give it to my brother, his brother?
Yeah.
Because that's the loving thing to do, is to have some kind of penalty for something where he's being unloving. Yeah. Like, I've got to teach him the truth, right? Somehow that's my responsibility. So that's what I do. And if that didn't work, his brother does the same thing with it, well, then it goes somewhere else. You know, I see a guy, here you have some guys on the corners, you know, who don't have jackets, you know, who living homeless or whatever. You say, well, here's my son's jacket. He deserves it better. You know, see what he does with it. Yeah. Make sense?
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. It's +1, Dom.
Already?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We hardly started.
We hardly started. I haven't actually discussed what I wanted to discuss with you yet. But we're getting there. We're getting there. Because does everyone understand this underlying thing? And that is, unless these truths that I'm learning about the universe actually enter me and are inside of me, I am not going to be benefited from the truths I am learning. That's a fundamental principle. And they have to be inside of me, in my heart, in my feelings, not inside of my head. Because if they're in my head, then what's in my heart will be different to what's in my head. And that makes life very difficult. Many of you are already experiencing a life like that, where you think you should be doing one thing, and then you end up doing another, and you go, why did I do that for? Right? Where you do one thing, and then you want to do the other thing you think. You want to do one thing that's loving, and then you end up doing the thing that's not loving, and then you go, I'm confused. Why did I do that when I thought I wanted to do the thing that was loving? And the reason why all those things happen is because the truth is not yet inside of us emotionally, and we don't understand how the soul actually works. We don't understand how we work, in other words. And how we work is, while there's an emotion inside of me that's in error, any truth that disagrees with that error will not enter me. Will not enter me. And I must get rid of the error emotionally in order for a truth to enter me. All right? It's a fundamental principle about the soul, and we'll talk more about it tomorrow. And the reason why I've raised that is because when we start talking about some beliefs about God, which I hope to do after our break now, you'll see, and in this case, last week we talked about some truths about God in terms of what God is, but this week I'd like to talk a bit more about what God does rather than what God is, right? And many of you will go, oh, you already know that. Oh, I already know that. But actually, you know it, but you don't know it you know it in your head, but not in your heart. It's not there yet. And you'll see the evidence of this in your life if you're honest with yourself. You'll see the evidence of it, right? And this is why we raise it. So that's what we'll do after our break. But let's come back about...
2:45.
No.
Well, oh, no, 1:45.
1:45. Half an hour from now. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, guys.